Hello friends, welcome to the channel Info New Zealand. In previous videos we discussed about why New Zealand is awesome to live in and visa options to migrate to New Zealand. So, this video, we are going to discuss about the cost of living in New Zealand to answer the question most of you asked. Is it expensive to live in New Zealand? So, let's find out. So, before you come to New Zealand, it is very important to find out cost of living in New Zealand and how much you have to spend while you are living in or visiting New Zealand. That helps you to calculate how much money you should bring when you are coming. To simplify our discussion, I thought about different categories that we need to spend money. Those are housing and rent, utility bills, furniture, vehicles and transportation, insurance, preschool and school, healthcare and entertainment. So, let's take each one and find out how much average money we have to spend on each category. Housing and renting are the most important one in the list. Renting house is a very common thing in New Zealand and especially for newcomers. Buying a house in New Zealand involves few other factors and a lot to talk about that. So, I will make a separate video for that. As I mentioned, renting is a very common thing in New Zealand, and it is not very straightforward to get a house for renting for a newcomer. If you are a family and if you plan to rent the whole house, mostly you have to contact a property agent and arrange some time to view the property. Still, depend on the time of the year, it can be very competitive since there are a lot of people are in house hunting. So, some people manage to contact property agents and arrange house viewings, before they come to New Zealand to accelerate the process of finding a house. If you are a single person, there is another common option in New Zealand, which is flatting. That means, you can rent a room instead, but the house owner or a group of people are also live in the house. Some students even share a room with friends, because it is very cheap until they start earning money. Rent can be different depend on which city you are going to live in. With the statistics, rent a house in Auckland is the expensive than renting in Wellington or South Island. So renting house in South Island can be the cheapest, but Auckland and Wellington are good with facilities. Renting a two-bedroom house in Wellington suburbs costs around $450 to $600 per week. A three-bedroom house costs more than $600. But if you plan to live in the city, the cost can be $600 or more per week for two-bedroom house as well. In New Zealand, we talk about those numbers per week all the time. All the numbers I am talking about are per week. If I am not specifically mentioned, that is per month. If you are flatting, a room will cost you from $200 to $400 and, it is also depending on the room type whether it is a single room, or a double room or a studio. That is why students prefer to share a room. Most of those properties are advertised on a website called Trade Me, and if you like explore little bit in that website, I put the URL in the description below. Next one in the list is, utility bills. If you are renting a house, it is obvious that you have to pay the utility bills. Most of the time, it is your responsibility to pay the electricity, gas or the internet bill if the house owner hasn't included it in your rent. There is a lot of power or energy providers in New Zealand and some of them are Genesis, Slingshot, Nova Energy and many more. Cost for electricity can be varied depend on the provider, and your electricity usage will be varied depend on which season in the year. The average electricity cost in Wellington for a three-members family is around from $150 to $250 per month, and that can go higher in the winter, since you may have to use heaters the whole day. Some people use gas for heating and cooking, so it will help to control your monthly cost. There are few websites that you can compare the prices of different power companies. Powerswitch.co.nz, and glimp.co.nz, are few of those very helpful websites to do a market research. There are a lot of internet service providers in New Zealand and some of them are 2 degrees, Vodafone, Spark, Slingshot, Nova Energy and many. Average cost per month will be from $60 to $110 per month, and that is unlimited data. Some regions in New Zealand are charging for water as well. Auckland is an example. Average water bill for a family of 3 members will be around $50 to $100. But the cool thing is, water is free in most of the regions and very pure. Next thing is householding stuffs and furniture. It is very common in New Zealand that the house you rent comes with no furniture, or only with the stove and fridge, or only stove sometimes. So, you have to buy the furniture for your first house, and you can keep moving stuff with you. Or buying second-hand furniture is very common in New Zealand and it is really cheap, less than half of the price of a new one. If you buy second-hand furniture, you can go to TradeMe website or Facebook Marketplace. If you buy via TradeMe, you have a good assurance than you are buying from Facebook Marketplace. Otherwise, if you prefer to buy new furniture, there are few places, and these are the popular places among people here. For electronic equipments including fridge, washing machine, televisions, you can check Noel Leeming or Harvey Norman or Warehouse. There are few other furniture shops like Big Save, Target Furniture, NZ Furniture and many that you can buy furniture, and there are some online stores as well. I will put prices of some furniture here and note that those prices are taken today while I am creating this video. So, it will be different when you are checking that on the website. Another important one is vehicles and transportation. Lot of cities in New Zealand have public transport facility, but it is not enough when you go further away from the city to the suburbs. And the frequency of you can find a bus or train, especially on weekends, won't be enough for your day-to-day things. However, New Zealand people or people come to New Zealand prefer to buy a car or vehicle for their own transportation. But mostly people commute to work, and train service to the city is reliable in peak hours. That is also varied depending on which city you are living in. Comparatively, the public transport in Auckland is better than the other cities, and train service in Wellington is good as well. So, when it comes to the cost, monthly pass for the train service will cost you from $120 to $300, and transportation is little expensive in New Zealand. Since the public transport is little expensive and not highly available for outside the city, almost everyone buys a car or another vehicle. Very nice thing is that the cars are really cheap in New Zealand. Buying a used car is also very common in New Zealand, and from $4,000 to $10,000, you can buy a decent car if you are not after a specific make and a model. There are a lot of car sales, showrooms, where you can buy a car, and, the process-wise, it is very simple. Just go and buy a car, take few hours. Just like that. Cars in New Zealand are very cheap, and so, a lot of people take this as an advantage to buy their dream car models which they couldn't afford to buy in their own countries. I plan to create another video about cars in New Zealand, so, do not forget to subscribe this video and click on the bell icon to receive and get reminder for new videos. I know, you are looking for information about groceries. The popular supermarkets for groceries are New World, Countdown and Pack and Save that most of the people are buying their groceries. But there are few others as well. And, people buying householding things from Warehouse and Kmart, which is very popular in all over the New Zealand. For average family, or a family with 3 people, the grocery will cost you from $100 to $300 per week excluding cloths and footwear. For clothing and footwear, still the Kmart and the Warehouse is a good and cheap option, but you have a lot of shops to buy even branded items if you are really after a specific brand. So that cost will be varied depending on which brand you prefer, but it will cost you around $20 to $80 for most of the clothes like t-shirt, trousers, shirt, jacket or footwear if you are buying from the Warehouse or Kmart. Another important thing is healthcare. Once you come to New Zealand, you are supposed to register for a doctor, a GP, in a medical center nearby. A doctor visit will cost you $40 to $80 depending on your location, and healthcare is totally free for children. Public hospitals are great and free if you are a permanent resident, and for some other visa categories and criteria which I am not knowledgeable to talk about. You can buy a medical insurance, and the cost will be varied depending on the insurance company and the things you plan to cover. Even you can cover the GP visit too, but you have to pay more for your premium. And average cost will be $40 to $150 for most of the people. Insurance is another important factor here. It is not a must, but people used to buy a content insurance to secure the belongings. It will cost around $300 to $600 per year for most of the people. The cost can be varied depending on the things you plan to cover in your content. Cost for the life insurance also depend on how much things you are going to cover, but average cost is $40 to $70 per fortnight for most of the people. If you are a family with kids, you have to find daycares and schools for them. For kids younger than 3 years, you can find a daycare and the cost per week will be around $150 to $300. If your kid is 3 years old or more, still you can find a daycare or kindergarten, and government will contribute for 20 hours time. But for primary schools, there is no fee as such other than donations for the development of the school and for the stationery that your kid needs. Please subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive more valuable video about New Zealand and how to migrate to New Zealand. The last one in my list is entertainment. There are a lot of things you can do in New Zealand, and it is again depending on which city you are living in. I made few other videos about New Zealand and about things you can do in New Zealand, you can watch later. Few things which come to my mind are traveling, shopping, biking, movies, restaurants, sports, swimming and so on. So, it is quite hard to say how much money you need for the entertainment, and it is depending on your personal desires. So, I can recommend that better check some website shows things to do in New Zealand or Wellington or South Island. Example is TripAdvisor website. Other than that, check out my channel to find out things to do in New Zealand.